What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another lesson. Today we've got something fun. We're actually going to be creating our first very own custom hook. So we've seen the power of hooks, right? We've seen the use stay hook, the use effect hook, and there are many more out there. And I recommend you look at usehooks.com. Very good website to go ahead and look at some hooks recipes that have been custom created by other people inside the community. But today we're going to build our very own first custom hook, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So get excited for that, and without further ado, let's jump in, guys. So the aim of today is that we're going to build a joke generator app, right? So it's going to look something like this, right? So we're going to have the joke generator, and when we click on generate joke, I want this to actually go ahead and generate some form of joke. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to pull from an API. Now this is a public API that I've found, and what I've actually found is that this API has the following endpoint. So if we go ahead, I'm just going to paste it in at the top here, and you can see it's API icndb.com/jokes/random. And you can see here, it actually gives you back a joke, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. It's a simple JSON response. And here we can see inside we have a joke key with a value, which is the joke itself. Okay, so this is perfect. If we go ahead and refresh, you can see it gives us a new joke every time. Now, something cool about this API is that if we go ahead and give it a first name, and let's go ahead and say the first name is Sunny, and the last name is, and be careful that it's camel case, so don't make that mistake. If I go ahead and do this, it actually goes ahead and uses my name in the joke. So it says Sunny Sanger is the only person to ever win a staring contest against Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder. So you can see if I go ahead and refresh, it's going to keep on coming out with jokes that have my name inside of it. So really cool public API. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead back to our code. Now first I'm going to show you how to use a fetch call to make that request that we saw over here. So this simple get request, I'm going to show you guys how to do that inside of a use effect, and then we're going to refactor that into our own custom hook. Okay, so let's get ready to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a use effect over here. And if you are unfamiliar with use effects, I highly recommend you rewatch the previous video. We went over things extensively in that one, and it helped out a lot of you. So this is a use effect call. We have to make sure that we import the use effect correctly. There we go, perfect. And what we're going to do here is we're simply going to have a function called const, and it's going to say fetch joke, right? Now what this is going to do, it's going to be an asynchronous function because it's making an API call. And what we're going to have is an arrow function, and this arrow function is simply going to go ahead and it's actually going to directly return. So we're not going to use curly brackets. Instead, we're going to use parentheses, and then we're going to say await because it's making a asynchronous call. So we want to await the response, and we're going to say fetch. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go ahead and have backticks for string interpolation. And then here I'm going to go ahead and paste the API endpoint. Okay. Now, remember guys, we can actually go ahead and pass the first name. So in this case, let's go ahead and say Sunny, and a last name. And remember camel casing, like I said, want to make sure we don't make a mistake there, right? And then the goal is to eventually go ahead and make these variables that we can go ahead and customize. Now, once we've done that, I'm going to hit save so it prettifies and gets rid of a few extra parentheses that we didn't need. And then what I'm going to do here is after the fetch is finished, I'm going to say then get the response of the fetch, because this will come back with a object in the form of a JSON response like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this response as a JSON object. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is that this will then give me the data back, right? So this will actually give me an object back. And what I can do at this point is I can go ahead and I can console log the data to see what we get inside. Okay, so this will happen on the component mount. What we have to make sure we also do, we have to make sure we actually call the fetch joke function. So let's go ahead and save, and then let's go to our right, and then you can see it's got a response back. So if we refresh just to show you, and I drop this down, it gives us a response which we've passed. So it was a JSON response, but we passed it and it gave us a data object. And then we can click into value, and you can see here is the joke, right? And you can see there are no such things as tornadoes. Sunny Sanger just hates trailer parks, right? So there's a few little jokes here. I didn't actually get that one, but I mean, I was laughing at that. But so you can see inside of here, you get the actual joke, right? So it's inside of the data.value.joke, okay? So what we can do here is we can just double check data.value.joke, right? Save it. And then let's go ahead and refresh. At this point, when you hit the refresh button, it will go ahead and have some jokes that are popping up on the screen. So some of them are very opinionated. So take it with a pinch of salt. But here you can see, okay, so we do get the data back. Okay, so what we want to do with this information is actually go ahead and store this inside of a variable. Okay, so what we can do here is we can simply go ahead and say const. And let's just go ahead and say joke, set joke, and I'm going to create a piece of state for this. So use state, and here I will initialize the joke initially with nothing. And then once we get that data back, what I'm actually going to do is set the joke to the data dot value dot joke, okay, instead of console logging it. And then what I can do is, because it will now be inside of this variable, I can go down here and I can go ahead and say the following. I can just say a h2 tag, and I can just pop my joke in. And then what you want to do as the final step is go ahead and import your use state like so. And then you should see compiled successfully, perfect. And then you can see every time I go ahead and refresh, it will come out with a different joke, okay? So you can see everything works perfectly, right? Sunny Sanga can download emails for his pickup, right? So you can see everything sort of comes out as we expected it to. Now, obviously the button doesn't work as we want, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to step this out into different phases. Firstly, we're actually going to create our own custom hook, and then we're going to hook it up to that generate joke button, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to create imagine if we had something like this. So the end goal here is to have our own custom hook, right? Which looks something like this. It's going to say const joke equals, and then we'll say use random joke. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to be able to pass in something like this. I want to be able to pass in my first name and my last name, and it will just make a joke based on those values. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and firstly comment this out. So this is just sort of a draft of what we want to achieve. But I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this one use random joke. Okay. .js. And then here I'm going to use our handy snippets tool. So I'm going to say RFCE. If you haven't got the snippets, then make sure you install those. And then what we're going to do is you can see it's simply a JSX, right? So it's a JSX return. So we don't actually need the return block over here. Instead, what we actually need to do is we simply need to do a few imports that we're going to need for a sec, right? We're going to need the use state hook, and we're going to need the use effect hook. Okay. So now that we've got everything prepared, what we can now do is, remember guys, that piece of state, the joke from earlier, right? We're actually going to initialize that over here inside of our custom hook, because we're going to need to store this value somewhere. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and cut this use effect, paste it inside of my custom hook, and then hit save, right? And then what I'm going to do is over here, you can see now that we actually have the use effect, we have our joke, and it just sets the joke, right? And then what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to simply return the joke. Okay. Now at this point, we have hard coded values. We have Sunny, we have Sanga. Okay. But if I go ahead and save this just to demonstrate the first step of getting this to work, right? So let's just quickly reiterate what we have. And also, you don't actually need this in the new React version of Create React App. It is actually not required anymore. So you have use random joke. We have our piece of state to keep track of the joke. We then have a use effect, which is triggered only on the hook mount. And then what actually happens is it fetches the joke, it converts it to JSON, it gets the data from the joke and sets it inside of our joke piece of state. Then it returns the joke. So now what we can actually do is we can go ahead and remember this code over here. It's going to be nearly that, but it's not just there yet. But it's going to say const joke equals use random joke, and then I can import, right? Use random joke, and at this point we don't actually pass in any values, right? It just goes ahead and calls our custom hook, and we also don't need to go ahead and have this top line anymore. So we can hit save now. And you should be able to see compiled successfully. And now what you can see is the code actually works the way we previously had it, right? So this is our first custom hook, guys, right? So we've actually just created our first custom hook. So it just says const joke equals use random joke. And it's honestly as simple as that. So you might have thought it might have been a bit more complicated. There's a lot that goes to it, but this is actually how simple it is. So once you understand how to use the use effect, you can see how powerful and clean your code can actually become. right? So jumping back in over here, we want to customize this so we can pass in the first name and last name like such, right? So in like this example over here. So how do we do that, right? So let's go ahead and do the following first. Let's go ahead and say Jim. And then as the second one, we'll say Jim Bob. So let's imagine we had a person with a first name Jim, surname Bob, and we want to pass that into our random joke, right? So now what we can actually do is very simple, actually. We can go ahead and just treat it like a normal function. So first name, last name, because essentially all it is a function, right? It takes a first name and a last name argument. And then what we can do is we can use our string interpolation. We can go here, and we can say first name and last name over here. We can go ahead and say last name. Now, before I hit save, think about this. Do we have to update the dependency array with any value? Right, so I'm going to give you just a sec to have a think about this. Do we have to update the dependency array with any value? Okay, the answer is yes. We do need to do that, right? We need to go ahead and actually add the first name and the last name to the dependency array, as now the code inside of the use effect is dependent on two of these variable values. Okay, so this is very important that we get that right, otherwise it will result in unexpected behavior. So we're going to hit save. Okay, and then we're going to go to our app, and now you can see it says use random joke for Jim and Bob. So let's go ahead and check if this works. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh, and you can say they say curiosity killed the cat. This is false. Jim Bob killed the cat, every single one of them, right? And then we can go ahead and refresh, and you can see it goes ahead and continues to create a new joke with Jim Bob, right? And just to prove to you that this works, if we say Sunny, or let's just say Papa, react, save, and now it says refresh. Crime does not pay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that one didn't do anything. Papa React grinds his coffee with his teeth and boils the water with his own rage, right? So you see it works perfectly there, right? So what we've actually done here is we've created our own custom hook, which is working perfectly. It takes a first name, a last name. It uses state. It has its own use effect. But the key part is it simply returns a value. Okay, so it simply returns a value. And here you can see all we do is we store that into a variable and then we move forward from it, right? So this is really, really all it actually takes. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take this a step further, right? We said before that we want to have it so when we generate a joke, it does the exact thing and it creates and generates a joke. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go ahead and upgrade this piece of code, and I'm going to show you how to use something called a reference as well as two pieces of state. And we're going to upgrade this so that way we have two input fields and the generate joke button, right? So we're going to upgrade this code right now just by doing that. So the first thing that we need to do is introduce two input fields, right? Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to introduce a form. So if you haven't actually seen the custom form lesson, I would recommend going ahead and checking that one out now. But here I'm going to go ahead and say input. I'm going to have one input and a second input. And then I'm going to take this button and I'm going to pop it inside of our form. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is by default it's type text. We don't need to actually have that. I'm going to go to the first form, and this needs to have a placeholder, and here I'm going to say first name, right? And for the second placeholder, I'm simply going to say last name. Okay, save, and now you can see we should have first name and last name. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create two pieces of state to keep track of what's inside the input field. So here we're going to say first name, set first name, and then here I'm going to say use a state, and this is going to be an empty string. Copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and simply refactor this to be last name, and make sure you camel case, perfect. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and save, but it's going to ask us to make sure that we import the use state. So I'm going to import use state like such. And then I'm also going to go ahead and hook up our input field. So here I'm going to say value equals first name. And then I'm going to do our necessary on change handler. And I'm going to say set first name to e.target.value. Okay. And then I'm going to grab this and I'm going to do the same thing for the last name. As we expect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to say last name, and again make sure your camel casing is correct. Okay, so we can go ahead and just check that this works by simply typing in here. So we should be able to type in, there we go, perfect, everything works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. So here I'm going to say on click, and I'm going to say when we click the generate joke button, I'm going to trigger a function called generate joke. Okay, so I need to obviously create this function. So we're going to say const generate joke. And this is going to be a function which takes E as an argument because it's a button submit. And what we want to do is, because it's inside of a form, I'm going to do e.prevent default to prevent the page from refreshing after I submit that form. Okay, so then the final step for this, right, is that we want to go ahead and only generate a new joke when we have clicked the generate joke button, right? So what we could do is, previously what you might be thinking is a solution is we can go ahead and say use random joke, and then here you can go ahead and say the first name and the last name. The problem with this approach, however, is that it will make a new request every single time the first name and last name changes, right? So it's going to be quite chaotic. So if I go ahead and say Sunny, you see, as I do it, it creates a new request every single time. And even here, if I go ahead and do this, it creates a new request every single time. So it's not actually dependent on the generate joke. It's just dependent on the values changing. But you can see how it's working in tandem with our new custom hook. So that's pretty cool, right? But what we want to do here is we want to make use of the useRef functionality, right? So useRef is actually a hook provided by React, which allows us to have a reference to an element on the page, okay? So think of a big finger and it's just pointing at an element, okay? So initially that big finger is defined with a value of null, right? But what we want to do is point that at a certain element. So that way, when we need to get the value of that element, the reference that is pointing to the element can give us the appropriate reference, okay? So here what I'll say is I'll say first name ref. So let's go ahead and make a reference for the first name. So we'll say first name ref, and we'll say equals useRef. Okay, so we need to import this from React. So make sure you do that. And then we're going to give this a starting value of no, because remember that finger is not pointing at anything initially. We're going to copy this and we're going to change, rather than first name, we're going to change it to last name. And then what we do is we simply connect this to our values over here, right? So previously, you see, this is how we would have done things, right? However, it creates a new request every single time. So now what we can actually do is make this a little bit simpler. We can get rid of all of this and say ref equals, and here I can say first name ref, right? And even here, what I can do is I can get rid of this and I can say last name ref. Okay, save. And then you can see our code's already a lot simpler. Now what I can do is when we click on generate joke, only at that point, right? So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Only at that point do we want to go ahead and grab the value from the input field and update our state, which will then re-trigger the joke to be generated again. So here what I can do is I can say set first name to be, and then I can go into our first name ref. So I can say, okay, get the pointer that was pointing at the first name input field, right? This has something called current, which is a property which says, okay, the current element that you're pointing at, right? So we want to get that element, and then we just simply have to say value. So we'll go ahead and get the element, and then it will get the value inside of it, okay? And then we're also going to do the same thing for the last name. So we're going to say last name ref dot current dot value, okay? And if we go ahead and hit save, think about what is happening at this point in time, right? So the initial value, let's go ahead and say is Sunny Sanga, right? So the first joke that we see on the screen should be a joke about Sunny Sanga, okay? Then what we're going to do is we can fill out the form. So this will go ahead and we have a reference to the first name input field, and we have a reference to the last name input field, but we can see now we're not actually manipulating the state of the first name and last name each time we type. And instead now, only when we click the generate joke button, will it trigger off our generate joke function, and e.prevent default prevents the page refresh. And here what will happen is it will update the first name in our state with the first name current value, right? So the first name reference current value, which means it's going to go to the input field, which has the reference for the first name, right? So we use first name reference to go ahead and connect that. And it's only at the point when you click generate joke going to go ahead and grab that value, and then it will update the first name, and the same happens with the last name. Now what then happens, because of the rules of hooks, these values will update, which causes a re-render, which means that this line of code will get re-executed, which means that it will now have the updated first name and the updated last name, and a new joke will be generated, right? So all of this elegance in one line of code. So let's go ahead and check this out. So Sunny Sanga, perfect, it's working. Now, if we go ahead and say, let's go ahead and say Steve Jobs and generate joke. Perfect. If you try to kill -9 Steve Jobs programs, it backfires, right? And let's go ahead and do Elon Musk. And I could even hit enter on the keyboard because it's inside of a form. In a tag team match, Elon Musk was teamed with Hulk Hogan against King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant. He pinned all three at the same time because we know Elon Musk is a badass, guys. So as you can see, that was our first custom hook, and that was pretty damn fun, right? We then went ahead and upgraded it with the functionality as we showed today. And you guys also got your first exposure to the use ref hook, right? So really, really fun stuff here. We actually combined not only our first own custom hook, but we also introduced the concept of use ref, right? So the references inside of React and how they can be used to point to certain elements. So that way we don't have the unnecessary re-renders inside of our app. With that said, guys, we are now at the end of this lesson. So if you found this helpful, go ahead and drop a comment below as to what was your favorite part about this lesson. And what we're going to be doing in the next lesson is we're going to be building a to-do app with React, right? So this is going to be your first major exercise. And we're going to go ahead and use all of the skills that we have learned here to go ahead and build a to-do app inside of React, right? So this would be perfect for your portfolio. And it's going to be a perfect little experiment for you to go ahead and test the skills that you've learned. So until then, guys, I will see you in the next video. Peace.